So every project needs a login system, database, a Docker container, right? Well, yes, but no. And many developers are not quite sure how to properly start a new project apart from starting with a login screen maybe, or they would install a latest framework, and that is wrongest way to start a project. And after 20 years and about 200 projects, I have few tips and tricks that I'm gonna share with you. So here I will give you a simple framework for starting a new project the right way or the better way. And we'll then walk through a real example that we're gonna use step by step into this framework. And by the end, you will know how to pick the most valuable part of the project that you're gonna start with, and you will know basically how to properly start a new project. So the most common response I get when I ask people how to start the projects is that they would start with a login form, or they would say a database, but we know it's not a login form, and we sure know it's not a database where you start. Or maybe they would install a framework that they're familiar with. But what if I tell you that you don't even need a login form at all to start, or maybe even not a database to have a valuable project, at least in the start? So why do we start with login? Well, it's probably a muscle memory. It's something that we see, it's something that we are familiar with, it's a safe choice, because every app needs users at the end. Unless it's a simple website, you need to be authenticated, so that's clearly needed, but not at the start of a project. It's like choosing the lock on a door before even agreeing if a door would be on a room, or if you're building a garage, or if you're building a shop where people will come in all the time. Then you need different doors on a bedroom, right? And if you think about it, if you use your favorite service, like for example YouTube here, do you even know what the login looks like? Do you even care about it? No, you just want login to work, or maybe a database to work, and you want to actually use this service. So here I have this pyramid that helps me visualize the software on several different levels. And this is a typical project, right? That could be something that we are working on. And it coincidentally aligns with different ways of communication that we're gonna cover later. But the point is that when you start with a login or maybe a database, you are starting somewhere around here at the bottom in this first level here. So you would start, this could be your login, or this could be your database functionality. So we are going into the very nitty-gritty details, the building blocks of the pyramid of the software, because that's where we are familiar. That's how we look at our software. And that is fine when you're building a pyramid for the pharaoh's tomb, but it's not perfect when we are building software. So if a login screen is not the right place to start here at the bottom, where do we start first? If you think about the regular pyramid, here at the top we have gold. This is where the value is on top of the pyramid, right? That's if you're familiar with Egyptian pyramids, this would be the gold. And in our sense, this would be the value or the money, or the whole point of the project, probably to make some money somewhere. And we developers, on the other hand, we are most comfortable here in the nitty-gritty and all the components that we are used to, again, the login forms and database and the framework choices. And we as pyramid builders, we know all the components that are needed to build a big pyramid and stable pyramid, so we would start here at the bottom with our components. But there are several levels here in between. So here are levels that are shaping this pyramid to become a pyramid, because you could use login form and databases and build something completely different. Today we're building pyramid, but here on this level you would have your bit bigger components like a Docker setup that we mentioned, or hosting that we might need, or it could be some other technical choices that would contribute to these components doing some functionality, maybe some APIs, right? However, if we go one step further or one step above that, here is where usually you would even talk with business people on this level. But on the third level of the pyramid, it could be the general functionality of our project. So this could be integration with payment services like Stripe, or maybe integration with some other pieces of software like, I don't know, maybe WordPress if you're into those kind of things. But this could be also some of the third-party services that you would use to achieve some of the functionality. So not necessarily the core functional code or component. It could be even a third-party service like integration with Google Maps, for example. One level above, you are talking less, usually around here, we start talking more business above than code. So here it would be business, and here below it would be more about tech. And at the top you could agree on features, on some overall functionality. We're gonna go in bit deep the details in those, but this could be your community section and your e-commerce section, right? So you would talk these blue and the red, obviously, with your business people, and the greens ones you would talk with technical people. Now, why would we care about business people at all? Well, that is because at the top is the money maker, is the core feature, is the core functionality. And this is also where attention happens when you're discussing with business people what you're going to build, because they are looking for the project, they're looking on the project from top down, starting with the moneymaker and with some of the features that they need, that they would deliver. But you are looking at the very core components like database. And then you are having conflict when the technology does not match requirements. And this is easier to show you what happens when we take one concrete example. So let's walk on one real life example here. I have a friend who is very much into tourism, and he built his business around tourism. And here we are talking about a system that will help people who are interested in diving. This is my attempt to draw the topic of diving or scuba diving, something like that. And these people are interested in several things here. And we are going to go to my friend and we are going to pitch him the idea of helping people who are interested in scuba diving, right? So the first thing he would ask is not obviously which database, APIs and framework we are going to use. He is going to talk about the business value of what's in it for him as well, to create more value for business and his customers. But basically the question is, what is the project about? So at this stage, obviously nobody cares about two-factor authentication or a database or a framework. Those are assumed. They are the plumbing. You expect it to be there and you expect it to work. So we start about the biggest functionality, and some of the functionality could be where people are interested into finding excursions, where they could travel and experience some of the scuba diving. They could have some functionality like gear. This is my attempt of drawing a gear here. But they could buy some equipment, or they could have a community. So a community where they would share experience with each other. But they would also have a functionality here, and this is very important. This is why you should actually follow these discussions at the beginning, because you might think, obviously, I'm not interested into business discussion, I just want to know what to build here. Well, that's why you don't know where to start, because you're jumping ahead. Here, one of the features here is having a white label possibility, so that each of the diving schools would have their own instance of the website. They would have their own list of excursions, gear and community, because they are maybe in different states, different countries or different cities, so nobody cares about each other, right? And that's why you need to follow up the discussion with the business. That's the main difference between junior programmers and the seasoned developers, because junior developers, they would start at the bottom of the pyramid here and they would jump into some technical solutions, whereas the developers, or let's say that's programmers, they're writing code, they're solving programming problems, but developers would develop this into a set of features which would then create value. So to know where to start, you need to be able to switch levels of thinking, and you need to be able to switch levels of communication. When you're talking with business people, you would be here up creating a value, but also when you're working with developers, you would keep your discussion on these first two levels, where you have more granular functionality, and we will go into how to discuss that actually. But the better you are at switching the hats or thinking hats or levels of the pyramid, the easier it will be for you to start properly, but also to go through your career and grow as a developer. But where do we actually start if we are not to start from the bottom here, right? Well, In our real example, to put theory to the test, our friend might say, fine, let me see how this would look like, and I will give you a few millions, but obviously you need to show me how it works first. So we're still not starting with login form, and maybe not even a database here, because unlike Egyptians who knew much more about building pyramids, they had several tries and they had many years, you and me, we cannot start from the bottom. So where do we start then? Well, we kind of start from the top, or at least we start in a top vertical, right? Where we would take one thing that is, let's say, most crucial and then build that first. And once we build that vertical, that one feature, we can see the value, we can see how it would look for users, we could see what problems it would solve, we could even show it to a test group, to friends, to family, and see what they think. And this is probably just a proof of concept, maybe a mock-up even, so it doesn't need a database, it doesn't need a login at all, you just need a look and feel, maybe a design, maybe a framework, to build one of the functionalities. So if we go to our feature list here, we could pick, let's say, feature 1, where we're gonna list the trips that people could make, and feature 2, where they could purchase some gear. So now when we start with that, we know what's most important, we know what's most crucial. However, it's not about saying these two are most important, we need to develop something there. So on the top level, where we were discussing here the functionality that it's going to have, we would say there is an e-commerce, for example, and there is a community part. In this case, there is an e-commerce for shopping the gear, but there is also just a listing of excursions. So we would say, let's pick the gear here. So this would be a gear that I'm trying to draw here. And on that functionality, we know what we have. Other functionality here would be the e-commerce, right? And probably some other functionality, but for now, let's keep it in one vertical here. Then the next level would be that for maybe list of excursions, we need some third-party CMS or some existing functionality. So we could say this is CMS, but we are not going to actually implement it, or maybe we could implement it. We're not going to develop it. But for the gear here, we will actually make a page with listing of some equipment, right? And maybe we would, if we go into much deeper, we would have a component, and then we could even at this point maybe even choose some framework that we are familiar that would cover some of these elements, but we could as well just stop here on this level or on this level maybe, where we could have something clickable and start communication with that. Then we are going to show this, we are going to develop this, and then we are going to show this, make it functional. So this will be shown or presented, obviously, and then we are going to test this and see, so this would be dev, and see how it behaves. And then we will adjust, come back with the feedback, and then we would develop again, show this to somebody or test. This could be the same thing if you are having the same group. And then once you're finished with this, you would start with the others. So this would be feature number 2. And for this, maybe you need some different components here on the very base level, but you would obviously always have in mind the total value of the project that you are working to and you're working towards, just to be sure that you always have the correct value delivered. And in order to show this, we don't need even a login system. We just need a few pages. And then the investors will, again, demo this to some test subjects, maybe to their friends, to some random people in the industry or on the street, and they will come back with the feedback and validate our idea or show us some improvements that we could do to have this be much better for the next thing. And then we are actually showing the value, and then his will to investment will increase. So after a week or two, we got a green light on the excursion and the equipment and e-commerce, and we also agree on the second level of technical requirements, like we need to be this to be a portal, or we need an option for whitelisting that we mentioned, that every club will have their own landing page and their own list, their own shop, and they would maybe pay a monthly rent or a percentage of sales or something like that, just an example, but you get my point. of how to start with the value first. Now we know where we can start technically, at least to a certain point, because you know some of the requirements and you know some of the features you're developing. So you can pick and choose, maybe agree where to actually start with this. But this is where you would ask for a question about the technical part. Let's say we come to this level where we are focusing on the database, right? You could start considering now which database you need, but also you could consider which database you could choose based on the requirements again. So you would not start with what you're comfortable. Why? Because we will come to a part where there could be a different architecture for different solutions here. Which brings us to the communication with basically both top of the pyramid, the business value, but also the bottom of the pyramid with developers. If we are now past phase where this is approved, you might get a team of 5 developers or 2 designers or whatever, and you need to be able to communicate both with your investors where the money is, where is the biggest value, and how are you moving towards it, but also with the technical team as to what are we developing actually. And there are a few different ways we could achieve this communication and solve this. And one of the most popular models that allows us to communicate on different levels is the C4 model, which basically has 4 levels. The first one is the context, the second was container, the third one is component, and the last one is code, if I'm not mistaken. This could be a separate video on the C4, and there are probably many videos on the internet that you can find, but I will just show the basics here, considering that C4 coincidentally has several levels of communication with my pyramid, which I was so certain that I came up with. Apparently, smarter people than me came up with that before, and that's where I drew my inspiration. But it's the similar as our pyramid when it comes to communication from the start. And the C4 stands for the context here, the level 1. The second level is components, but the context is talking about the overall level. And if we are building a travel agency system, the context isn't login, it's the customers browse excursions, for example. So we would have one component for excursions, which I'm attempting to draw an airplane here. You would obviously maybe not use drawings, but you could if you want. But there could be another functionality like listing of excursion, listing of the gear that they would buy here, and there would be a community section here where members could share some of their trips or experiences that they have experienced, right? Now the context is for business and product stakeholders who basically want to know why the system exists, basically, not just how it's wired under the hood. And each of these boxes would have their own next level. So if we drop down to the container level here, we are now mapping out the big blocks of the systems. Let's talk about, I don't know, the excursion part, right? So we could have here the some CMS that would list all excursions. We would have an API or payment API there where members could pay in. But this could also be the list of the gear. If we take that list of gear and not excursions, we can see now that we are talking a bit granular level, and if we would have to build our own e-commerce parts of it, so the APIs and the payment providers are given to us, we would need to go to the third level, which is basically talking about individual components. So if this component would be the e-commerce, so the list of those excursions, or the gear, I keep switching from them, but you pick your example, we would here come to the very important technical decision, and here is where we would start thinking about functionality. And here is why it's important that you were there from the start, that you understand the entire business, what has been discussed, and what is the most important, the value of the pyramid, because this is where your job is actually coming to show. This is where you are paid, or based on your expertise, Because one of the requirements, if you remember, is having different white label options for our partners or for our users, customers, to have their own individual websites where they could have their own individual list of gears and list of excursions and list of communities, right? So here we need to choose how are we going to separate A from B. So this should be A or B, meaning company 1 and company B or company 2. How are we going to separate them? We could go for the option 1 where we have one database, and inside that database we are going to put in every possible table the customer ID, for example. So in your component here that is about the listing, and in your other component that is about booking or maybe a reserving place or taking the money in, you need somehow to know which customer, which company are you going to get the list for, but also charge the money for and give the provision to. Meaning that you could again have one database where you would have company ID, or there could be a requirement or this could be a solution where you would have individual database per company, per client. So you could have as many databases, as many companies, as many clients, depending on your system, depending on the complexity and depending on the requirements. If they're in Europe, for example, they might have different set of GDPR rules than they are if in the United States, where those rules are a bit different or maybe don't even exist. Or you could even have a mixed solution where you could have a group of companies going into a single database and another group of companies who are paying extra. They could have their own instances of, say, database, but also their own instances of the code, depending again on the business discussion that was discussed earlier. And you need to know that, you need to understand that in order to make good technical decisions. This is just one example of things that you would go through. So if you start with value and you go into details, you need to figure out what questions you should ask and how should this work. The best way of doing this is if you do it iteratively, where you would develop, show and test and come back to it and adjust. Because the earlier you can make these decisions, know which question to ask, the better it is for you, because you can easily adjust rather than building everything and then figuring out that now you need to put a customer ID in every possible field, in every possible database. That would be really, really cumbersome. There is also a fourth level in the 4C, and even they on their own website say that this is something you should not document beforehand. This is something that would be driven by code. So the actual code you would write would have option to export or to generate your diagrams, so that you are not pushing down your code based on somebody's drawing. You would actually update the drawing based on the code that would give you most value. And this is the advantage of pairing the C4 model with our thinking pyramid or our communication pyramid. At the top, the investor doesn't care about your technical solutions, but also your technical solutions are, in a sense, related and contribute to the most important thing in the system. And also, when you get a team of developers, you know the top value and you can communicate it clearly, and you know that every line of code and every decision that's been made contributes to the overall bigger pictures, so that the engineers doesn't lose sight of why their code matters. And here in between there is a structure which puts these building blocks into the value, right? So my main takeaways on how to start building project properly and successfully is to remember this pyramid or several levels of communication, but also in the functionality that will be on each and different level. So start with smallest possible, but make sure you have at least one vertical that what you're building is generating value, and making sure that your technical decisions are value-driven. Again, coming back to the top of the pyramid and then build gradually from there, and then you would expand it while validating all the time what you're actually building. And when you do it like this, you always know where to start. You always know to keep everyone in the loop. And most importantly, you're not afraid of any changes that might come after testing, because whatever changes, you are still building the most important feature, just maybe some different way. And once you can do that, you're not just writing code anymore, you are building products, you are a software developer, you are making value. And if this feels hard, that's normal, and that is why I'm holding the completely free meetings and community workshops for my students and for people who want to step up their game. It's volunteer-based, and if you just want to join to improve your game, there is a link in the description. Just book a meeting on my website, and we will find ways to help you with your problems. See you next time.